Fred Vasseur and the FIA are at war, and nobody in the paddock saw it coming this way. What happens when a governing body changes the rules after telling a team those exact rules were locked in? What happens when the team that built its entire car strategy around a promise suddenly finds that promise broken? And what does it mean for Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, the two drivers caught in the middle of it? Stay with me, because this is one of the most quietly explosive controversies of the 2026 Formula One season, and it goes right to the heart of how fair this sport really is. Let's start at the beginning, because context is everything here. Formula One underwent a complete regulation overhaul for 2026. New chassis rules, new power units, a near-even split between combustion power and electrical power. It was the biggest technical shakeup the sport had seen in years. And buried inside that shakeup was one small but critical engineering detail: the removal of the MGU-H, the motor generator unit that used to sit on the turbocharger. Without it, turbo lag became a real problem again. Cars would take longer to build boost, longer to get full power down, especially right at the start of a race. Every team knew this. Every engineer building a 2026 car had to account for it. So teams made design choices, real, expensive, committed engineering choices, based on the starting procedure they were told would remain the same. And that's exactly where this story turns. Because Fred Vasseur has stated plainly that the FIA had been clear from the beginning that the start procedure would not change. Ferrari believed them. Ferrari built around that promise. And according to Vasseur, Ferrari made specific decisions about their power unit, reportedly including a smaller turbocharger, precisely because they trusted the starting sequence would stay consistent. Then, during pre-season testing in Bahrain, the topic resurfaced. And it didn't just resurface as a conversation. It came back as an actual change. So here's the question that should stop you in your tracks. What happens when a Formula One team makes an irreversible engineering decision based on a rule, only for that rule to shift right before the season begins? Vasseur didn't hide his reaction. He described being genuinely surprised the topic came back at all, pointing out that turbo lag had been a known factor from day one, something every team had to weigh when designing this generation of power unit. His frustration wasn't really about the safety concern itself. It was about trust, about building a strategy around a governing body's word, only to watch that word change at the worst possible moment. So what exactly did the FIA change? They introduced a 5-second delay, often described as a blue light warning sequence, inserted before the traditional red lights that signal the start of a Formula One race. On paper, it sounds like a minor tweak. In practice, it gave every team extra time to build boost in their turbos before the actual green light moment. And that single adjustment reshaped the entire competitive picture at the start of every race. Here's why that mattered so much to Ferrari specifically. Thanks to their engineering choices, the ones built around the original starting procedure, Ferrari had developed what looked like a genuine launch advantage in the opening races of the season. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc were converting that advantage into real results, picking up podiums in each of the first 3 Grands Prix. Ferrari looked like the clear second fastest team on the grid behind Mercedes. Their start line speed wasn't luck. It was the direct payoff of a calculated risk, designing a smaller turbo, accepting certain trade-offs elsewhere, all in exchange for getting off the line faster than anyone else. And then the extra 5 seconds arrived, giving rival teams the exact cushion they needed to solve their own turbo lag problems and close that gap. So who actually pushed for this change? According to Vasseur, it wasn't a simple, isolated safety call made in a vacuum. He pointed to something far more political: a significant portion of the grid, reportedly around 40% of the teams, raising concerns about danger at the start line. And Vasseur didn't dismiss the safety framing outright. He acknowledged the FIA's reasoning, particularly after a genuinely alarming moment at the Australian Grand Prix, when one car stalled on the grid and narrowly avoided a serious incident as another driver swerved just in time to miss it. That's a real, legitimate safety concern. Nobody can argue with that. But Vasseur's real issue was with the optics of it all. Teams that were struggling with their own launch procedures were the loudest voices calling for change, and the change that resulted just so happened to erase the very advantage Ferrari had built through smarter engineering. Was this genuinely about safety? Or did safety become the convenient justification for a competitive correction? That's the question hanging over this entire saga. Vasseur's public comments only sharpened that suspicion. He pointed directly at the lobbying efforts from rival teams, suggesting that having a large share of the grid complain loudly about danger was, in his words, a politically smart move, but not necessarily a fair one. Think about how remarkable that accusation is. This isn't some anonymous paddock whisper. This is a Formula One team principal, on record, essentially accusing his competitors of manufacturing a safety narrative to claw back a performance disadvantage. And when asked whether Ferrari should have fought harder to block the rule change, Vasseur's response was almost resigned. He said it was a safety issue, that he didn't have to agree with the decision, but that ultimately, if the FIA decided to act, they were going to act regardless of what any team thought. That's a telling admission. It shows a team principal who feels his hands were tied, who knows exactly what he thinks happened, but who also understands he has no real power to reverse it. Now let's bring Hamilton and Leclerc into this picture because they're the ones actually living out the consequences of this decision every single race weekend. Both drivers benefited directly from Ferrari's early season launch advantage, converting strong starts into position gains and podium finishes when the car itself wasn't necessarily the fastest on pure pace. That start line edge was, in a very real sense, part of what kept Ferrari competitive with Mercedes in the opening stretch of the season. So what happens to a title challenge when one of your genuine advantages gets legislated away mid-season? Does Ferrari have anything left in reserve to compensate? Or does removing that launch advantage tip the competitive balance in the direction it was already heading before Ferrari's engineers found their workaround? This is where the story becomes bigger than just one contentious rule, because Vasseur didn't stop at criticizing the start procedure. He's since spoken about broader FIA matters too, including a proposal floated by FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem for an independent engine supplier, potentially opening the door for a manufacturer like Cosworth to build power units for customer teams. Vasseur's response was measured but pointed. He suggested the actual engineering wouldn't be the hard part. The real challenge would be building something genuinely competitive within Formula One's strict cost cap. It's a smaller story on its own, but taken together with the start procedure saga, a pattern starts to emerge. Ferrari's team principal has spent much of 2026 pushing back, publicly and repeatedly, against decisions coming out of the FIA, decisions he sees as reactive, political, or simply not fully thought through before being imposed on the grid. So where does that leave Ferrari heading into the rest of the season? On one hand, they still have Hamilton and Leclerc delivering results, still have a car that's shown genuine competitiveness against Mercedes. On the other hand, they're now racing without one of the specific advantages their engineers worked hard to build, an advantage taken away not by a rival out-engineering them, but by a rule change made after the fact. That's a uniquely frustrating position for any team to be in. It's one thing to lose ground because a competitor simply built a faster car. It's another thing entirely to lose ground because the goalposts moved after you'd already committed to your strategy. And that raises the biggest question of all, the one that will linger over Ferrari's championship campaign all the way to the final race. Was this 5-second change the moment that quietly cost Ferrari a shot at closing the gap to Mercedes? Or will their engineers find another way to claw back the advantage they lost, the same way they found it in the first place? Vasseur clearly believes his team was wronged by how this decision came together. The paddock is watching to see whether Ferrari can adapt fast enough to make it irrelevant. What do you think? Was the FIA right to prioritize safety here, even if it happened to help Ferrari's rivals close the gap? Or was Vasseur right to call out the politics behind it? Let us know in the comments because this debate is far from settled. If you want to stay on top of every twist in this Ferrari FIA story as the season heads into its final stretch, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because there's a lot more of this saga still to come. See you in the next one.